hard to predict the future, which is what I guess he's trying to do right now. But, you know, he tried to do that back in '03 as well when he said, akin to what he's saying right now, Fannie and Freddie do very good work, and they are not endangering the fiscal health of this country. The ranking member also said, I think it is clear that Fannie and Freddie are sufficiently secure so they are no great danger. So the same statements that he's making now about how well run Fannie and Freddie are and how well the underwriting is of the loans that they are taking in right now going forward, in essence, are really what he said in this committee back in '03 about the loans that we were taking out at that time, and we all saw they didn't really turn out so well. I'm sure the Secretary will agree that the loans that they are taking out right now have not had the opportunity to what season, if you will, and that in reality you have to look at loans a little bit down the road to really see whether what the loss ratios are going to be. Is that a fair assessment?
True, but if you look at the estimates people have made, FHFA, of the future losses associated with the guarantees they've been writing since conservatorship, the estimates that they make are not just modest.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But of course, those were exactly, you weren't here at the time, but those were basically the same arguments that were being made and the ranking member were making at the time as well. If you looked at the projections back in '03, as the ranking member was saying, things didn't look so bad. But my close where I began. It's always hard to predict the future. The ranking member didn't do a very good job of predicting the future back in '03. We'll see whether his predictions are good in this event.
Well, we don't.
But to your report, you know, one of the common arguments we hear from the people who are supporting of a guarantee, federal guarantee, is that if you don't have it, the cost for homeowners is just going to skyrocket with regard to home ownership in this country, and people won't be able to achieve the American dream. So to that point, and you've done your whole report and what have you, did you do any, did you run any quantitative analysis in any one or all three of your options to determine exactly what the overall impact will be on the monthly payments for a consumer in order to get those?
Let me just start with the basic, the following observation, which is that under any of these options, the cost of a mortgage is going to be higher in the future. It has to be, because the government
what about the monthly costs, though, actually? Not just the mortgage, but the overall monthly cost of owning that home.
I'm going to answer your question, but I'm not going to try to answer your question. But I'm just saying, under any of those options, they're going to be somewhat higher than they were before the crisis, and they need to be. That's sort of a fundamental reality we face. Now, we have looked at a range of estimates at what the ultimate impact might be on these options on the cost of a mortgage, but very hard to judge until they're defined more clearly. You cannot know until you look precisely at what version of option 1, 2, or 3, or which mix of those options you would do. You can't tell. You know they'll be higher, I think modestly higher, but different degrees of increase depending on the mix of those options you ultimately embrace.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, let me just refer you to an economic analysis that was done. This was done, some would call him, by a liberal economist, Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. And he used a report, he looked at it, you know, looks at a 30-year mortgage, which is what we're talking about here, under a purely private system. And he says that'll be about 90 basis points, as you're saying, more expensive than under a similar mortgage system where you have the government guarantee. So what you're saying is true, a little bit higher cost in his projections. But then he goes into it a little bit deeper. He says, what would the overall cost be if you combine it with a median price of, let's say, $170,000 mortgage? And this is what he comes out with. He calculates that the monthly payment for the mortgage, what you're talking about, under a hybrid system would be around $833, okay? Then he calculates that a similar mortgage under a purely private system would have a higher financing cost, is what you're saying, but the overall price of the house then, right, would be less expensive, and the monthly payment would be only about $8 more. Okay, so a little bit more under that scenario with a purely private sector. Next, however, he factors in the monthly taxes that you'll be paying on the house, and because the house now under the hybrid system, on the guaranteed system, would be more expensive, housing prices would contain high, the property taxes would be greater. He then finds the final calculation is under the monthly payments under a private system, but about $4 less than under the hybrid system. So overall, you add all that together, the mortgage, the higher mortgage price, lower price of the house, and then the lower property taxes, he comes in between like $830, just about a difference of about $4, okay? So, but even if his numbers are off a few dollars there, doesn't the fact that the numbers are so close to each other indicate then that a hybrid system really doesn't outweigh the cost of a private system with all the inherent risks that go with it to the taxpayer at the end of the day.
I don't, just like you just said, you should be cautious about predicting the future. I don't think you can make any of those judgments without knowing the precise details of what the government role is in this context. And I think it's almost certain that the costs to the homeowner, all in,
Right.
would be higher under option 1 and higher under option 2 than they would be in option 3. But under all those options, it's going to be somewhat more expensive to borrow to finance a home than was true before the crisis.
I think so.
Congresswoman Water.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.